everybody, and welcome back to the Zodcast on Subscribestar. And of course, there is a advertisement for the Mikado playing at Harvey Auditorium at Bakersfield College on Thursday, May 28th. And that was the year of our Lord, 1953, when that production was done. And of course, I believe that was the version of the Mikado that influenced the Zodiac killer, not other than Don Chaney. And he was there, of course, with another gentleman that was attending that little tiny college in Bakersfield, California at the same time, named Paul Avery. And this video, of course, is going to be all about Avery, or Avery if you're the Zodiac. And we've never totally figured out why the Zodiac referred to him as that, but there he is in a picture from the yearbook, from the 1953 yearbook from Bakersfield College. And it is all about Avery. And, you know, what my theory is that the Zodiac called him that because Paul Avery was the director of student assemblies at Bakersfield Junior College. So, of course, assembly having the L-Y, that's just kind of my thing. I'm just speculating on that. I just like it, of course. So, Paul Avery is born on April 2nd, 1934 in Honolulu, Hawaii. And it's just 3.5 months or so after Arthur Lee Allen is born in the same exact hospital on December 18th of 1933. So these two guys are born in the same hospital and just about 3.5 or so months apart. Of course, just said the date so you can figure that out. And also what they had in common was that Paul Avery was the son of a naval lieutenant named Paul Stewart Depew. And he was also, of course, Avery comes from his adoptive father, Howard Malcolm Avery. But when he's born the son of Paul Stewart Depew. He was named Paul Stewart Depew Jr. And he was, of course, born in Hawaii, where he had some other relatives have been there, including on his mother's side, the Cannon family, who were well known in the ranks of Mormonism. And one of his, I think his grandfather helped bring the LDS Church and Mormonism into Hawaii. So it's one of the things that was kind of notable of him on his mother's side. So about 3 years after Paul Stewart Depew is born, his parents get divorced, and his mother, who's Frances Cannon Depew, then marries Howard Malcolm Avery. That's how Paul Avery becomes Paul Avery from Paul Stewart Depew. So I don't know if Avery actually formally adopted him, but Paul Avery does take his name, and I say that because I have been talking to Paul Avery's daughter, Kristen Avery, who's fastly becoming one of my best friends. She's just the greatest, and I love talking to Kristen. She's just one of the nicest, coolest people, and I always wanted to talk to her, and I finally did, and talked to her actually today again. So she's filled me in on a lot of the timeline and stuff with her dad, Paul Avery. And one thing I wasn't sure of is when Paul Avery leaves Bakersfield Junior College, sometime around mid-1953, he moves again with his family, his mother, and his naval lieutenant father, Howard Malcolm Avery, to another naval base. And I'm not sure where that is, but that is where Paul Avery meets his wife and eventually has two daughters, one of them being Kristen, who I've been talking to. So that's where he went. And then she winds up being from Mississippi. So that's how Paul Avery finds his first job writing for a newspaper for money is in Vicksburg, Mississippi, because his wife's family is from a nearby town in Mississippi. So he winds up getting work as a reporter there in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So one thing Kristen told me that Paul would do is that he would hitchhike from Vicksburg to Hazelhurst, Mississippi to court her mother. So he had already basically followed her to Mississippi while they were still dating, and then eventually got married to her while they were in Mississippi, is the way I understand it. And she married Paul when she turned 17. I guess that was a legal age in Mississippi to get married back then. So it was kind of like a Elvis Presley, Priscilla deal there. Just waiting for her to get old enough to legally marry. So, of course, on the screen, that is Paul Avery's first wife, and that is Kristen's mom. I can't remember her name. I think it's Peg or something like that. But anyway, after Mississippi, Paul and his wife moved to Texas, and he's down in the valley of Texas, and he's reporting on sports in the newspaper, and he's covering wrestling, which is kind of odd for what Avery's career would later become. And then he goes to Alaska for a while, where his first daughter Charlie was born, and then 2 years later he relocates to Hawaii, his place of birth, and then has his second daughter Kristen that I know. So after that, he eventually makes his way back to California, and the rest is history. He gets a job at the San Francisco Chronicle, and the first time Paul Avery gets on the map is, of course, reporting on the infamous Zodiac killer case. And I want to read a little excerpt from this article about Paul Avery after he had been at the Chronicle for a few years. And it says, Paul was an up-and-coming 29-year-old with a reputation as a demon reporter during 4 years at the Chronicle. Short-haired, clean-shaven, and fragrant with Old Spice, he wore a dark suit and knitted Ernst wool tie. It was neatly knotted and, like its owner, fashionably narrow. Paul didn't wear a hat. That was for older guys. As he introduced himself, he said he lived in a Novato tract home with his little family. For all we know, he voted Republican. Fellow reporter Duffy Jennings remembered the old Paul was not above a little skullduggery to beat a competitor to an exclusive or usurp someone else's turf, Duffy said. So that gives you a little flavor about how Paul Avery was at his time at the San Francisco Chronicle when he began writing about the Zodiac killer, and of course, infamously later on, getting correspondences sent directly to him from the Zodiac killer. But first, I want to mention something that his daughter relayed to me that I never knew before, was that Paul's lucky number was 26, and she said that he was literally obsessed with the number 26. And anytime he could make that number would come up or anything, he thought that would bring him extremely good luck. And it was just something that people that knew Paul Avery really well, like Kristen did, that he was literally obsessed with the number 26. So I don't know how it plays into the Zodiac stuff, but I thought it was definitely interesting to note. Kristen also told me that during the Zodiac times, she lived with her father, Paul Avery, on his houseboat every summer since 1970. So, of course, she was there for the summer before her dad got the infamous Halloween card. And, of course, I asked her about that, and she told me that she remembered him getting the card. He brought copies of it home. They all sat around trying to decipher it, just like the scene in the Zodiac movie. So they said about, the whole family trying to figure out what that card meant. She said that he went out and bought a gun. Of course, we know that. And she said her mom had that .38 revolver that Paul Avery got for protection for many years. She said it was just a small handgun. She said her dad probably would have shot himself in the foot with it. She said that he wasn't scared. She said her dad was just on to the next story. That's just how it works. She said the Zodiac killed 5 people, and so they weren't even in the States when it began. Of course, that's true. Sometimes you see Paul Avery floated around as a Zodiac killer suspect, but Kristen made it clear that, first of all, she thought that was funny, knowing, how out of shape her dad was. I mean, he was always smoking. He was always drinking. He would have been out of breath just trying to kill somebody, literally. So she thought it was funny. And he was actually in Hong Kong at the time of Lake Herman Road, so there's no way that he could have participated in that crime because they were living in Hong Kong at that point after moving from Vietnam. So at some point after the hoopla over the Halloween card died down, her parents eventually got divorced, and then her dad obviously went on to report about the SLA and the Patty Hearst thing and Richard Nixon. So that's what she said about the Zodiac. He enjoyed doing it. He was still interested in it, but at some point he acted like he just wanted to move on from it, which I think was pretty weird, because especially after he was directly threatened via the Halloween card that was, of course, addressed from your secret pal, that being Zodiac. So I just don't know how he can shake that. I just don't. And I asked her, was he ever scared of the Zodiac coming after him? And she said no. She said that she was scared when she was still living in California during the time after the Zodiac's reign and the correspondences were going around in 1970 and 71. She was really scared that the Zodiac might come after her. She lived on a street that just had some woods by it, so she was always worried that the Zodiac might come out of the woods and come after her. So she was legitimately scared of the Zodiac coming after her. So I asked Kristen if she knew anything about her father having his own Zodiac suspect, because that's something I read a while back, and I can't find where that was, but I do know that Paul Avery had his own Zodiac suspect that he had been working on and collecting information about his suspect, and I thought it was a merchant marine or something. I'm not really sure. And she did recall him having a suspect, and she thought told me that her dad thought the killer had worked as a janitor at some college, and this was in Southern California. So I don't know if she was kind of conflating that maybe with the Sherry Joe Bates murder in the desktop poem, but it's possible because she said she recalled her dad telling her that the Zodiac carved his cross circle logo into a desk in Southern California where he supposedly worked as a janitor. So I'm not sure how much that's true, but he did have a suspect, and I know he turned in information about his suspect to the police, and of course it never went anywhere. And Paul Avery, to my knowledge, never told anyone who that suspect was. I did see someone kick around that maybe a janitor in Vallejo was a suspect a while back. I don't even remember if it went very far, but I thought of that person when she told me that her dad thought the Zodiac was a janitor at some college. So that's all she kind of knew about that. So another interesting, she said just what a character her dad was. She said, this is a direct quote from her. She said, he was a cross between the Pink Panther and Monk. At the end of the day, he had 5 to 10 lighters and pens he walked away with. So I thought that was pretty funny. Of course, Monk being the OCD TV character. And I guess every time Paul would get someone to light a cigarette for him, he'd manage to walk away with the guy's lighter. So that definitely seems the way that Paul Avery would be. And then, of course, we were talking about the YouTube video of her dad at the houseboat where he's at the marina, and they're at, this is Ian, they interviewed him, I think, just a few days after he received the Halloween card, and he doesn't seem nervous at all. And I asked her, it's like, yeah, he just seems so calm after being threatened by the Zodiac. And she said, yeah, he was probably just really stoned. So that gives you a little insight into Paul Avery and the funny things that surround him. And speaking about funny things, Kristen shared with me this story, which I thought was extremely funny. And she said this happened to her about a year ago, that she was talking to her oldest grandson. She has 2 daughters of her own. And she was talking to her grandson about Papa Paul. And her grandson did know her father, because after Paul Avery retired, he actually went and lived with Kristen in Mississippi with her and her grandchildren. So they got to know him for a couple of years. And this was before, of course, that Paul married Margot St. James and lived on Orcas Island in Washington. But she said a year ago she was talking to her oldest grandson about Papa Paul, as they called him, and her grandson loves Iron Man from the Marvel Comics, and she was joking with him and said that Iron Man is his great-grandfather, and Robert Downey Jr. is her daddy, of course, because Robert Downey Jr. played her dad in the Zodiac film. Kristen had said the same thing to multiple people many times, as a joke, of course, and she said that her grandson knows that Robert Downey Jr. played his grandfather in the Zodiac movie, but he's never watched it. And she says, as we talked, she finally realized that her poor grandson had thought for years that Paul Avery was the Zodiac, a serial killer. She said she asked him if he had actually gone the last 2 or 3 years thinking that, and he said yes, he had. And she totally forgot to ask if he had told his friends this, so she just had to call him a few minutes ago after she told me this, which was a few days ago, and they had to talk through it to make sure his friends didn't believe that his grandfather was the Zodiac killer. So I thought that was a pretty funny story.